He kicked his black adoptive mother out, unaware she was hiding $20 million. He kicked her out of the house she built with her bare hands, changed the locks, called her a guest, left her standing in the cold, but what he didn't know, she was hiding $20 million. And the strength of a black mother you should never cross. This isn't just betrayal, it's a reckoning. And when she comes back, she doesn't knock, she reclaims, don't blink. This story will break your heart, and then set it on fire. He kicked out the woman who raised him. She was hiding $20 million. It was the kind of late Thursday afternoon where the sky turns quiet. The sun dangled low, unsure whether to shine or slip away early. The air was still. But something in Evelyn's chest stirred, a kind of stillness that didn't feel like peace. She stood on the front porch of the house she had lived in for 22 years, soft house slippers on her feet, a reusable grocery bag in her arms. Inside the bag, a loaf of bread, a few cans of beans, and a warm rotisserie chicken still sweating through the plastic. Her cardigan was the powder blue one, Leonard's favorite. It still held a faint scent of lavender from last week's wash. As she shifted her hip against the door, balancing the bag, she reached for her keys and tried to unlock the door like she had done every single day for more than 2 decades. But the key wouldn't turn. She paused, frowned, tried again. First slow, then fast, flipped the key upside down, took a breath, tried again, still nothing. Her door refused her like a stranger. Confused, she stepped back and looked at the house. The same brick porch. The same hanging fern that Natalie always forgot to water. Everything was exactly as it should be, except she was on the outside. She knocked gently at first, then again louder. And then once more the bag of groceries pressing against her hip as she rapped her knuckles harder. The door creaked open, just a crack. Natalie peeked through the gap. Her makeup was fresh, her lashes long, her eyebrows lifted in what looked like awkward surprise. Her voice came out casual, almost rehearsed. "Oh, hey, you weren't supposed to be back until later." Evelyn blinked. "Why can't I get in the house?" Natalie glanced over her shoulder, then stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door behind her until it clicked shut. "Ryan was going to talk to you about that," she said softly. "Talk to me about what?" Natalie hesitated. Her tone shifted, as if trying to make it sound like just another errand. "You don't live here anymore." The words didn't fall, they slammed. Evelyn's breath caught. Her grip on the grocery bag tightened until the rotisserie chicken shifted against her forearm. What did you just say?" Natalie gave a small smile. The kind people give when they don't want to answer more questions. "It's just paperwork stuff, nothing personal. Ryan said you agreed to transfer the deed." "I what?" "You signed a few weeks ago, remember? All those forms at the kitchen table." Evelyn didn't speak, but her eyes did. Something was unraveling. She remembered the forms, remembered Ryan brushing off her questions. "It's just housekeeping," he had said. "Gotta keep things in order." He had smiled when he said it, kissed her cheek like it was nothing. "It's to protect the house, Mama. If anything happens to you, it stays in the family." Back then it made sense. Now it felt like a trap. Natalie backed away, reaching for the doorknob. "I'll give Ryan a call," she mumbled before slipping inside. The door clicked shut again, then locked. Evelyn didn't knock anymore. She stood still. 5 minutes passed. 10, nothing. The chicken was cooling. The bread going stale by the second. Her arms ached. Her fingers trembled. But her face stayed still like stone. She walked down the porch steps slowly. The sun dipped lower. Her shadow stretched across the walkway like something fading. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she wasn't welcome here anymore. And that house, the one she had poured her soul into, that wasn't hers now, but she had built it with bedtime stories and braids. With Saturday zoo trips and cornbread on Sundays, with asthma inhalers and midnight prayers. She had scrubbed the baseboards on her knees, painted that front door herself twice, paid every bill, kept every secret, buried her husband from that porch and rocked her baby through chicken pox on that same swing. And now the lock was changed. Ryan hadn't just taken the deed, he had taken something deeper. But Evelyn Carter was about to remember exactly who she was. And Ryan, he had no idea what kind of woman he just locked out. How a black woman's love built a family from scraps. Long before the lock ever changed, before the betrayal and the silence, Evelyn Carter had held a baby in her arms who wasn't hers. And yet, from the moment he grabbed her scrub sleeve and wouldn't let go, she knew her life would never be the same. It was 1996, and the fluorescent lights of scent. Joseph's Hospital in Jackson, Mississippi, buzzed overhead like a tired old song. Evelyn was halfway through the night shift, pushing a cart of linens down the pediatric hall when she heard the cry. Not a loud one, not a tantrum. Just a soft, hoarse whimper coming from room 214. She stepped inside, and there he was. A pale, bony little boy, no older than 2, sat at the edge of the hospital bed in a t-shirt that drooped off his shoulders. There were mustard stains on the collar. His wrist was wrapped in gauze. His eyes were hollow, scanning every corner of the room but not daring to meet hers. The nurse at the station had told her the child's foster mother dropped him off and left. No emergency contacts, no explanation. Just a note scribbled on a crumpled napkin, he fell. Evelyn stood at the doorway, quiet. "You hungry?" she asked gently, no answer. She reached into the bottom of her cart and pulled out a single packet of animal crackers she kept stashed away for emergencies. The boy didn't move. But when she stepped closer and tore the packet open, he reached out. Not for the snack, but for her sleeve. He clung to the cotton fabric like it was life itself. And Evelyn, she didn't pull away. She sat down. The boy laid his head on her lap, and for the first time that night, he closed his eyes. She didn't know his name then, didn't know the trauma packed into those small, shaking bones. But something deep inside her, older than reason, stronger than logic, said, "Don't let go." She never meant to adopt. After 2 miscarriages and a heartbreakingly silent round of IVF, Evelyn had made peace with the idea of motherhood passing her by. She poured her love into patients, into church kids, into nieces and nephews who only came around on Easter. But sometimes God doesn't knock. Sometimes he places a child in your arms and dares you to walk away. Ryan. That's what they said his name was when social services came the next morning. He didn't speak for days, wouldn't eat unless she fed him herself, wouldn't sleep unless she sat beside the bed. His breath wheezed through the nights. She learned he had asthma. She didn't leave his side. 2 months later, she filed the first set of adoption papers. 6 months after that, he had her last name. Her friends thought she was out of her mind. "Girl, you trying to save the whole foster care system." Her friend Carla teased. Evelyn smiled. "No, just this one." There she was, a single black woman in her late 30s, working hospital shifts to pay the mortgage, adopting a white child with a storm of emotional needs and a mountain of trauma. The stares came fast, at grocery stores, at the post office, at the church potluck. People didn't know whether to whisper or call child services, but Evelyn didn't care. She was too busy raising a child. Race car beds and peanut butter sandwiches with no crust. Saturday morning pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse. She learned how to braid toy doll hair so she could teach him how to braid his future daughters. She made him write thank you notes every Christmas, even when he pouted. She clapped loudest at every piano recital, even when he only played 2 keys right. When he had asthma attacks, She sat by his bed all night with a cold cloth and whispered stories until his breathing steadied. When he struggled to read, she got him a tutor, then sat beside him after the tutor left, going over the same words again. "You're not like other moms," he once said when he was 9. Evelyn had looked at him and smiled. "That's 'cause I'm not trying to be." But as he got older, things started to shift. By the time Ryan hit middle school, the questions came hard and fast. Why do I look different from you? Why do people stare at us in public? Why does everybody say I'm adopted? Evelyn always gave the same answer. Calm, simple, full of truth. Because you are, but that doesn't mean you're not mine. He nodded, but the look in his eyes changed over time. In high school, he pulled away more, stopped holding her hand in public, started calling her Evelyn when he got mad. By college, he barely came home. When he did, it was just a dinner, a quick hug, and gone again. But Evelyn never complained. She kept his old room just the way he left it. The trophies, the alphabet magnets, the Spider-Man bedspread she could never convince him to let go of. She thought love was enough, even if it was quiet. Even if it got no thank you cards in return. Then Leonard passed, her husband, her balance, the man who had held her steady through every heartbreak, a man of few words, all of them solid. They had met in church, fallen in love over fried catfish and scripture, built a home from patience and prayer. His death left the house quieter, and that's when Ryan started coming around again. He helped with the lawn, took out the trash. Brought Natalie with him, always smiling, always distracted. Evelyn thought maybe he missed her. She didn't realize then. He wasn't coming home to reconnect. He had come to take inventory. And by the time she saw it, by the time the papers were signed and the locks changed, it was already done. But what Ryan didn't know was this: he had mistaken her softness for weakness. He had misread quiet love as vulnerability. What he'd forgotten, or maybe never understood, was that black women have been building families from scraps since this country began. And Evelyn Carter had built hers with blood, prayer, and bone-deep love. He may have taken her house, but she still had the fire, the deception beneath the pie and paperwork. The first time Ryan placed those papers in front of her, the oven was ticking with the smell of sweet potato pie, and the late afternoon rain hadn't yet touched the windows but already lived in Evelyn's knees. She was folding dish towels at the kitchen table, the same table that had once held finger paints and science projects and birthday cakes. The wood still bore the scratch where Ryan had carved his initials back when he couldn't spell them straight. She ran her hand over that groove almost every Sunday. He walked in without calling first. Wore a slim-fitted dress shirt that looked too expensive for someone still living off ambition. Natalie trailed behind him, eyes glued to her phone, thumbs dancing like she had more important places to be. "Hey, Mama," he said, leaning down for a half-hearted hug. "We brought some paperwork, nothing serious, just tax stuff. Trying to help you get ahead of the game." Evelyn looked up from her towel. "What kind of paperwork?" Ryan opened a folder like he was showing her a new recipe. Pages and pages, printed, highlighted, clipped together in small, neat piles. He smiled. "Just house stuff. You know, real estate, power of attorney, trust forms. Natalie's firm does this all the time. Super standard. It's just to clean things up on the back end in case anything ever happens." Natalie, still not looking up from her phone, added flatly, "It's how we protect your assets. Avoid probate. Totally normal." Evelyn didn't respond right away. She looked down at the top page. The words swam. She wasn't wearing her reading glasses. She hated how they pinched her nose and made her feel old. Ryan noticed. "Here," he said, gently sliding the pen toward her. "I already highlighted the signature lines. You don't need to worry about the rest. I went over everything with them." Evelyn held the pen, but her hand didn't move. Something in her stomach shifted, barely, but she pushed it down. "I should probably have someone look this over," she said softly. Ryan chuckled, easy, charming, the way men do when they know they have the upper hand. "You don't trust me." "That's not what I said." "Come on, Mama, it's just paperwork. We're doing this for you." And that word, we hung in the air, as if Natalie had earned a place at that table, as if she'd scrubbed floors and sat up through asthma attacks and paid for braces and kissed skinned knees, as if she had anything to protect. Still, Evelyn signed. One page, then another. He joked, "You're making history, Mama." She laughed once, soft and thin. The pie timer went off. She stood and moved to the oven, not knowing she was walking away from the last normal day she'd have in her own home. The next few visits were different, shorter, tighter. Ryan started coming with new people, always in a rush, always checking his phone. He brought men in polos with blinding white smiles, called them advisors. Told her about flipping houses, leveraging equity, scaling portfolios. She didn't understand half of it, didn't ask. She just made cornbread and watched Jeopardy while they talked out on the porch like she wasn't there. And then one afternoon, while watering her begonias near the front yard, Evelyn heard Natalie's voice drifting from the porch. "Once we close on this place, we can finally get that apartment in Dallas." That's when Evelyn started packing a bag, just a small one, not out of fear, but out of knowing. She tucked her Bible into the bottom, her passport, a photo of Leonard, the last bank statement she'd received from the settlement. And that notebook, the one where she wrote everything down because nurses document by instinct. She said nothing. She kept her routine, cooked dinner, watched her shows, watered the begonias even though she knew they'd be gone soon. And then came the moment that told her it was time. She had just finished vacuuming the living room, still liked doing it herself. Something about a clean floor reminded her that she was still in control of something. Ryan walked in, sunglasses on, earbuds around his neck, talking loud. Natalie behind him on a Bluetooth call. Neither said hello. They passed her like a shadow. Then Ryan turned almost as an afterthought. "Hey, next time you use the Dyson, can you empty it out? We've got some people coming to see the place this weekend." Evelyn stared. "People. Realtors, just getting a feel for the value. Market research." "You're selling the house?" Ryan laughed. "Not yet, just thinking ahead, exploring options, you know." She stood up straight. "Our options." And that's when he said it. "You're a guest now, Mama. Still your space, of course, but legally, well, you know how it is." Evelyn didn't answer. She just looked at him, then looked past him. The boy she had raised wasn't there anymore. That night she zipped up the small bag, 2 dresses, 1 pair of sneakers, her notebook. And Leonard's wedding band, still tucked inside the satin pouch beside her bed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She left before sunrise and didn't tell a soul, because sometimes the quietest exits are the loudest kind of strength. And Evelyn Carter was not running. She was remembering. A car, a Bible, and $20 million in the dark. The car was parked 2 blocks down from the house. No, not the house. Not anymore. The same house she used to rock Ryan to sleep in. The same house where Leonard had taught him how to ride a bike, where Sunday gospel played loud enough for the neighbors to hum along. It now stood dark and silent behind her. Evelyn sat in the driver's seat of her old Buick, engine off, hands locked on the steering wheel. 10 and 2, like she was still driving, but the road had stopped moving. The rotisserie chicken sat untouched in the passenger seat, cold now. The plastic sagged with grease. The bag of beans and bread slumped against the floorboard. Her cardigan still smelled like lavender, but that comfort felt distant, like a hymn you used to know by heart but couldn't quite remember the words to anymore. She didn't cry, not when the lock turned her away, not when Natalie shut the door in her face, not even now with nothing but the hum of a street lamp flickering above her windshield. Because grief, real grief, doesn't always scream. Sometimes it sits still, heavy like bricks in your chest, like silence pressed up against your bones. Evelyn stared out at the row of duplexes across the street, peeling paint, porch chairs made of faded plastic. One had a wind chime that played off-key notes when the breeze came through. Another had a child's pink bike laying sideways in the yard, the front tire still spinning slightly from being thrown down. She had seen enough broken places in her life to know that healing doesn't always start in comfort. Sometimes it starts in the cold seat of your own car. Sometimes it starts with remembering what you've been hiding from everyone, including yourself. The next morning, Evelyn walked into the bank. Not a fancy one, just a local branch she trusted. The teller smiled politely, the way young people do when they assume you're somebody's grandma who just needs help checking a balance. Evelyn sat down, slow, with the stiffness that had settled into her knees over the last few years. Her ankles were swollen, her purse heavier than usual, not because of anything inside it, but because of everything she carried. She handed over her ID and bank account details, under her maiden name, the same name she had used when she set up the trust 2 years ago. The young woman behind the glass clicked through a few screens, her smile fading slightly. "Is this amount correct?" she asked, eyes wide. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, it is." She didn't blink, because Evelyn Carter had not been broke, not even close. 2 years ago, after Leonard passed from a misdiagnosed blood clot, Evelyn had seen the signs. She had been a nurse too long not to know when a hospital was covering its tracks. She filed complaints, spoke to a friend from church who'd been a lawyer back in the day, and after a quiet but persistent legal battle, she won a malpractice settlement. $20 million. But she told no one, not Ryan, not her friends, not even the pastor at New Bethel. She split the money across a handful of banks, put the rest into a trust under a name nobody would think to look for. Not out of paranoia, but peace. Because Evelyn knew something about the way people changed when money entered the room, especially family. She remembered the note she had written in the back of her old prayer journal the day the settlement came through. "Don't let money make you loud. Let it make you quiet. Let it buy you time." Now she sat in the bank lobby, watching people move in and out, her world still bruised but not broken, and she realized something powerful. Ryan hadn't stolen her future. He had simply removed himself from it. She gathered her things, left the bank with nothing more than a receipt and a plan. Evelyn checked into a small motel off the highway, paid in cash. 2 nights, no questions. The room was dim, the carpet thin. The heater wheezed every 15 minutes like it was catching its breath, but it was hers, and it was quiet. She opened her notebook. The same one where she had written Leonard's medication schedule, grocery lists, and Bible verses for hard days. At the back was a number, faded ink, but still legible. C.J. Bell, Leonard's old friend. A lawyer, long retired, but sharp as a tack and twice as stubborn. He used to joke he could spot a lie from across a state line. Evelyn stared at the number. She hadn't called him in years. But tonight, something told her to dial. She picked up the motel phone and let it ring. Once, twice, 4 times, then. "This better be Jesus or trouble." Evelyn smiled for the first time in days. "Maybe it's both," she said. "Evelyn." "Oh yeah, it's me." Silence fell on the other end. Not cold silence, the kind that says someone just sat up a little straighter. "I need to talk to you," she whispered. CJ didn't need to be convinced. "Where are you?" he asked. "Motel off I-20. Near the gas station with the broken ice machine." "I'll be there in the morning. Bring coffee. You bring the truth." That night, Evelyn placed her Bible on the nightstand, opened it to Psalms, let the pages fall where they wanted. And in that still motel room, far from everything she built and everyone who forgot what she gave, she remembered who she was. She wasn't some old woman with nowhere to go. She was a builder, a survivor. A woman with $20 million in quiet power, and a storm gathering in her bones. The old-school lawyer who helped her fight back with $20 million strength. The diner sat just off the I-20 exit, one of those places where time moved slower and nobody judged you for drinking coffee at sunrise. The sign flickered half-lit, the way memories do when they've been around too long but still refuse to fade. Inside, the air smelled like bacon grease and burnt toast. Vinyl booths squeaked when you sat down. The kind of place where the waitress called everybody baby, whether they were 5 or 85. C.J. Bell was already there, sitting in the corner booth with his coat draped over the seat beside him, and a coffee mug cradled in both hands like it held more than caffeine. He looked older now, beard gone full gray, eyes a little softer but just as sharp. Still wore the same heavy glasses and that old leather briefcase, scarred and worn from 1,000 court battles and 1,000 more street fights before that. When Evelyn walked in, his eyes lifted without surprise. He'd always had that sixth sense. "You look like hell," he said, not unkindly. Evelyn slid into the booth and set her purse beside her. "Good morning to you too." He sipped his coffee and nodded toward her hands. "You bring the notebook." She reached into her bag, pulled it out, and placed it between them. "Every word I could remember, every date, every conversation, I wrote it all down." C.J. flipped through the pages, eyes moving fast, fingers tracing the ink. He didn't speak for a long while, just read. Finally, he set it down and leaned back. "Lord have mercy, he really played you." "I let him," she said quietly. "No, you trusted him," C.J. corrected. "That's not the same thing." Evelyn looked down at her napkin, twisting the corner between her fingers. "I signed the deed. It's done." C.J. leaned forward, voice low but steady. "Signing under false pretenses doesn't make it legal, not if you were misled, not if he lied or hid the real purpose of those documents." He tapped the notebook. "This right here. This is your case." Evelyn looked at him. "You really think we can take him to court?" C.J. smiled, slow and knowing. "I could take that boy to court in my sleep." She didn't laugh, not really, but something inside her exhaled for the first time in days. "I'm tired, C.J. I'm not trying to destroy him. I want my name back on my door. I want to look at myself and not feel like a fool." He nodded. "Then we're not going to destroy him. We're going to teach him." They spent the next 2 hours in that booth. C.J. broke everything down, explained how the law viewed property transfers, what language mattered, what judges looked for, what could be proved, what couldn't. He scribbled notes on napkins. Pulled out a legal pad from that beat-up briefcase. Asked Evelyn questions like he was building a house out of her pain, and each answer added a brick. Then Evelyn said something she hadn't told anyone else. "I have money." C.J. didn't look up. "You mean savings?" She shook her head. "Settlement money from Leonard's case, 20 million. That got his attention. He blinked once, sat back. "You've been sitting on $20 million and letting this boy run circles around you." She looked out the window. "I didn't want the money to change how I loved him." C.J. didn't speak right away. Then he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "It didn't," he said. "He changed, not you." The waitress came by, poured fresh coffee, left them alone. Outside, trucks rumbled down the highway. Life kept moving. But inside that diner, something sacred was happening. A woman who had been silenced was reclaiming her voice. A woman who had been pushed aside was stepping back into her power. And beside her sat a man who had seen too many courtrooms and too many betrayals not to recognize a righteous fight when it walked through the door wearing house slippers and heartache. CJ looked her square in the eyes. "We're going to fix this." Evelyn nodded. For the first time in a long while, she believed it. She faced the son who betrayed her with $20 million worth of silence. The porch hadn't changed. Same chipped paint on the railing. Same creaky step second from the top. Same wind chime that Leonard hung up the year they planted the begonias. But something was missing now. The warmth, the peace. The history still lingered, but it no longer lived there. Evelyn pulled into the driveway just after 4. The sunlight was low and golden, that rich Mississippi kind of gold that made everything look older, softer, sadder. She sat in the car for a full minute, letting the air settle. She wasn't nervous. She was done being nervous. She had worn her good shoes. The black leather ones Leonard always said made her walk like she meant it. She wore a clean blouse, the one with the mother-of-pearl buttons, and around her neck a silver cross that had belonged to her grandmother. Not for show, for strength. She stepped out and walked slowly toward the house. The begonias were gone, replaced by some cold, decorative gravel and a potted plant that looked like it had been chosen for Instagram, not for home. She knocked once. The door opened halfway. Ryan stood there in gym shorts and a hoodie that probably cost more than her car note ever had. He was holding a protein shake. His face tightened the moment he saw her. "Ma, what are you doing here?" Evelyn didn't move from the step. "I don't need much of your time," she said. "I just came to say something." He looked over his shoulder like he was checking if Natalie was nearby, then stepped out onto the porch. "If this is about the house..." She lifted a hand. He stopped talking. "I raised you when nobody else would, not because I had to, not even because I wanted to. I did it because you were a child who needed love, and I gave it to you." "All of it." Ryan looked down, but she kept going. "I gave up vacations, gave up sleep, gave up the only body I had left to make sure you got a chance in this world. And you..." Her voice cracked but didn't break. "You repaid me with a signature and a changed lock." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You signed, Ma, I didn't force. Don't call me Ma if you don't mean it." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loud, thundering. She took one small step closer. "I'm not here to fight, not here to beg. I just want you to know I know what you did, and you should know I'm not broke, never was." Ryan blinked. "I have enough to buy this house 10 times over. $20 million, in my name, in accounts you'll never touch." His mouth fell open. He started to speak, but nothing came out. "I never told you," she said, "because love isn't business, loyalty isn't leverage. I kept it quiet because I wanted to raise you, not own you." His face changed, from disbelief to panic to something else, shame. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You weren't supposed to." "You're right, you weren't supposed to know. Because it shouldn't have mattered." She exhaled, slow and steady. "But now you do, and now I do." He opened his mouth again, but she didn't let him speak. "I've already talked to a lawyer. This will go through the courts. The papers you made me sign won't hold, but I didn't come to talk about lawsuits. I came to look at you one last time. The man I raised, the man who forgot who helped him breathe." Ryan's hand dropped to his side. "You're going to sue me." "No," she said. "I'm going to remind you what a real home costs." And just like that, she turned, walked back down the steps, one creak at a time. She didn't yell, didn't slam the car door, didn't look back. Because Evelyn Carter didn't need to prove anything. She had already won. Not in court, in character. And for the first time in that house's long, complicated history, the porch finally saw what strength really looked like. The court took her side, but she didn't need to go back. 3 months later, the house stood empty. No porch lights. No laughter spilling out through the windows, no Natalie's voice echoing off the walls, no smell of sweet potato pie. Just silence, heavy, final. A retired schoolteacher from Lafayette bought the place, said it felt like it had been through something. She wasn't wrong. Some homes don't just carry memories, they carry battles, and this one had seen it all. Evelyn didn't attend the final showing. She didn't need to. CJ handled everything. He moved like fire through dry brush, fast, clean, focused. The fraud petition passed through the court quicker than anyone expected. Evelyn's documentation was airtight. Dates, names, details, pages of it handwritten and honest. The judge reviewed the documents, flipped through the testimony, and didn't even blink. She was misled, he said, and that was all it took. No cameras, no shouting, just truth placed quietly on the table and accepted. Ryan never showed up to the hearing, not once. By the time judgment was entered, he had already left the state. Packed up whatever he hadn't already sold and disappeared. Natalie went back to Dallas without him. Nobody called Evelyn to explain. Nobody dared. She didn't smile when she heard it. Didn't say, "I told you so," didn't laugh. She simply exhaled. One long, slow breath. The kind that comes from somewhere deep, somewhere beneath the ribs. The kind of breath that feels like something sacred has been waiting inside you, and finally it lets go. She didn't move back in. Didn't want to. Too many ghosts in that kitchen. Too many echoes in those walls. Sunday dinners that now felt like rehearsals for betrayal. A front door that still held the memory of her being locked out. No. That house was built from her love, but it didn't deserve the rest of her peace. Instead, she turned the page. And she didn't look back, because justice had come, not loud, not violent, but quiet and clear, like water returning to stillness after the storm. Evelyn didn't win because she had money. She won because she remembered her worth. And that's the kind of justice this world can't always measure with gavel strikes or dollar signs. She never needed the house. She just needed to know that what she built with her heart couldn't be erased by someone else's pen. She walked forward, head high, shoulders straight, because real victory doesn't always come with celebration. Sometimes it walks away with grace. She used her $20 million to build homes for the forgotten. Evelyn didn't buy a mansion. She didn't move to the coast or into a high-rise with a view of the skyline. She didn't fill her closets with diamonds or leather bags or shoes she couldn't pronounce. Instead, she drove down to Pascagoula, Mississippi, a small town with quiet streets, soft dirt roads, and porches that still had rocking chairs. She bought 3 modest houses, nothing fancy. Brick and wood, peeling paint, overgrown yards, but strong bones like her. Each house had enough space for a living room full of stories, a kitchen full of pots and greens and laughter, and a bedroom for women who had nowhere left to go. She called the little project Len's Place, named it after Leonard. "It's the kind of thing he would have done," she said when CJ asked why. He nodded, not because he agreed, but because he understood. Evelyn turned each house into a haven. The first resident was Alma, 74, kicked out by her grandson when she couldn't babysit his children anymore. Then came Darlene. Her own daughter sold her home while she was in rehab for a hip replacement. Then Maggie, who was living in a shelter after her niece said the guest room was too crowded. They came in tired, bent, carrying bags not just of clothes, but of silence, of betrayal, of old griefs that didn't make the news but lived in their joints, and in the way they stared at the floor too long. Evelyn didn't ask many questions. She just opened the door, made them tea, showed them where the light switches were, and cooked Sunday dinner, real meals, neck bones and collard greens, hot water cornbread. Peach cobbler served in chipped bowls because the bowls didn't need to be perfect to hold sweetness. Sometimes they watched game shows together. Sometimes they just sat on the porch and traded stories about who hurt them and who they survived anyway. They didn't know all of Evelyn's story, but they felt it in the way she moved, in how she poured coffee, in how she said grace with her eyes closed a second longer than most, in how she fixed the broken cabinet door in the kitchen with her own hands and didn't say a word about it. They knew, and they didn't need to ask. CJ stopped by once a week, not for legal work. Just to make sure everything was still moving, he called her the woman who turned betrayal into blueprints. Evelyn would just smile, shake her head, and wipe the table. "I did what my mama taught me," she said once. "You don't fold when you're cornered, you pray, you plant your feet, and you protect your peace." Word started to spread, not wide, just enough. Other women reached out, not for pity, but for a place where no one asked them to explain why they didn't have a place to go. Evelyn added flower beds out front. She let the ladies pick what to plant. Some chose marigolds, others liked roses. Alma wanted sweet peas because her mother used to grow them when she was a girl. Darlene picked lavender for the scent. Maggie planted mint, and every Sunday the porch was full. Fold-out chairs, gospel playing low through the screen door. Laughter. Knit blankets over tired knees, steam rising from mugs. The house wasn't just shelter, it was resurrection. Evelyn never once raised her voice. She didn't need to, because some power doesn't scream, it builds again, brick by brick. Porch by porch, she didn't just get even, she got holy. A letter arrives, but she doesn't need closure to forgive. The sun was sinking low over Pascagoula, bleeding streaks of orange and gold across the sky like stained glass pulled wide open. The air was warm, soft, the kind that wrapped around your shoulders like a prayer too deep to put into words. Evelyn sat on the back porch of Len's place, a fleece blanket across her lap and a chipped teacup resting on the armrest of her chair. She rocked gently, steady as breath. The porch creaked beneath her, familiar and forgiving. Alma was upstairs crocheting something bright and uncoordinated. Darlene was in the kitchen humming to herself while she washed collard greens. Maggie was still out front, watering the mint like she was coaxing it back to life. And Evelyn, she was holding a letter. It had come that morning. No return address. Just her name, written in the kind of handwriting you only get from someone who's never had to write a real apology before. She opened it slowly, not with fear, not with anger, just patience. Inside was a single piece of paper, no grand paragraphs, no excuses, just a few lines written in nervous ink. "I messed up. I see that now. I don't know why I did it the way I did. Maybe I thought I was owed something. Maybe I never really understood what you gave me. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted to say it. You didn't deserve what I did. I hope you're okay. Signed, Ryan." Evelyn read it twice, then a third time slower, letting each word breathe. Then she folded the paper neatly, the way she had once folded his baby clothes after the dryer. And she placed it in the back of her Bible, tucked between Psalms and her old prayer notes. Not because she planned to revisit it often, but because some things deserve to be remembered without being relived. She didn't write him back. She didn't need to. Forgiveness to her wasn't about letting someone off the hook. It was about letting herself breathe without the weight of what they did to her still sitting in her lungs. She sipped her tea, closed her eyes. The breeze touched her face, soft and cool. CJ had called earlier that week, said he'd be by on Saturday with fresh forms for the next property. Another house. Another home for another woman whose story the world never bothered to ask about. Evelyn smiled, not because life had been kind, but because she had chosen to be. She had loved with her whole body. She had lost more than she'd been given, and still she had planted something in the soil of all that sorrow and watched it grow into mercy. Real love, she knew now, can't be stolen. Real mothers do fold. And real power, it doesn't scream. It builds again quietly from the ground. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't found in fighting back. It's in walking away with grace, knowing who you are. Evelyn's story reminds us that love doesn't always return the way we give it, but dignity, when rooted deep, cannot be taken. She didn't just survive betrayal. She turned it into refuge, into legacy. Let this be a reminder. No matter what's been done to you, your worth is not up for negotiation. Real power doesn't need to shout. It rebuilds, quietly, boldly, in its own time. If this story touched you, helped you reflect, or reminded you of someone you love, leave us a comment below and tell us what part stayed with you. Like this video, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Black Unbreakable so you don't miss what's coming next. Because we're just getting started. In our next episodes, we'll bring you more true stories. Stories of struggle, injustice, redemption, and breathtaking resilience from the Black community. Stories you've never heard but will never forget. Stories that will make you think. Stories that will make you feel. Stories that will remind you. We've always been unbreakable.